certificate results. What happened, where are we, and yeah, in that order. Thank you very much. Over to you, DM.
Thank you and good morning to you, Chair, and we want to appreciate this opportunity to be invited to the Select Committee on Education and Technology, Sports, Arts and Culture. We really feel privileged also to be invited to this meeting to come and present on the briefing of the 2020 NSC examination outcome. Chair, you'll know that 2020 was a very difficult year, not only in the sector education, but in the whole nation, in the whole world. So, and that affected the class of 2020. And not only the grade 12s, from grade R, they were affected, the entire class, whether you are 2020 grade R, 2020 grade 11, you were affected. The class of 2020 was affected due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that led to even the internal grades because of the reworking of the curriculum, the internal grades not to complete the entire curriculum, which means now where they are in their progressed grades, they still carry the work of the previous grade. And that will also affect the grade 12 of 2021 because they must finish the grade 11 work and still do the grade 12 work. Yet the differentiated timetabling is still in place. All the other grades are not going to school every day like we know. So the challenges are still with us. But what was key in the 2020 class of 2020 grade 12, they were faced with this pandemic and the differentiation and losing about almost 2 months, 57 days, which they lost of not attending to school. That's why we are correct to say they are resilient. And indeed they are, because the percentage that they got, we never expected it. And yes, we'll say it's 76.2 or whatever, but in essence, if you can remove the progressed learners, all of them, then it gives us 81%, which means, like we are correct to say, they performed exactly like the class of 2019. And because 2019, the MEO was still in place. So the progressed learners, those whom we felt that they could not write all the subjects, opted to take half subjects and they were not counted. That's why when we said we have exceeded the performance of all the other 2020 is the case, but because of the discontinuation of the MEO, all the progress learners were supposed to be writing the entire paper. And be as it that may, still the performance is outstanding. And we want to appreciate and thank those learners because some of the progress learners, they got bachelor's distinctions, and it tells that had we hold them in grade 11 and not take them to grade 12, they would not have achieved what they have achieved. So that opportunity that is given to them is working. But we are here with the full team of Umalusi, the chairperson of Umalusi board, Prof. Volmark is here, the CO is here, the DG, Mr. Matanzi Mamueli, is also here with the team education. I will take this opportunity and hand to the DG to, yes, he might not be the one who's leading who's going to do the presentation because he has the full team here, but I'm giving to the DG to take the process forward. Thank you so much, Chair. DG, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, honorable members, Honorable Deputy Minister. I also want to acknowledge and appreciate Professor Volmik as the chair of Umalusi, the CEO, and the hardworking senior managers of Umalusi. Just one or two things, DM. Honorable Chair, the class of 2020, in our view, performed better than the class of 2019. It is only the overall pass rate where they have performed lower than by 5.1%. Only the overall pass rate. But if it comes to the number of bachelors, the number of distinctions, you'll see even in the number of subjects, you know, your gateway, your high enrollment subjects, the class of 2020 performed is probably the best class ever. The only area where they performed lower was the overall pass rate. But if you look at other aspects, they really outperformed all previous classes. Maybe without wasting any time, I'm going to request Dr. Polia to quickly take us through the presentation. DM, we've made sure that this presentation, unlike the presentation we made to the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education, reflects more on provincial dynamics because the Select Committee, as being part of the National Council of Provinces, they would be interested in provincial dynamics. And we've made sure that we reflect more on those aspects of the provincial dynamics. I'm going to request Dr. Polia to take us through the presentation, but also to say, Honorable Chair, that the administration of the 2020 exams was the biggest ever. We've never handled over 1 million candidates sitting for the exams or in one administration, and this was the biggest, you know, administration of the exams that we've ever handled, even before our democratic dispensation, even after the democratic dispensation. I'm going to request Dr. Polia then to take us through this very comprehensive presentation. Thank you for indulging us and for affording us the opportunity to come and account when things are going well, but also account when things are not going well. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Honorable Deputy Minister. Dr. Polia.
Thank you, DG. Good morning to the Honorable Chairperson. Good morning to the honorable members of the Select Committee, and good morning to the team from Umalusi, and good morning to our DM. I'm hoping, Chairperson, that you can hear me, and I am a little bit concerned about the time that we have available. Like DG has mentioned, we have a very comprehensive presentation of 129 slides. If I could be given an indication of the time, Honorable Chairperson, so that I could structure the presentation accordingly. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
If that will be the only presentation, we have an hour. Now it's 20 past 10, 20 past 11, according to what I saw in the program. Yeah, 20 past 11, we must have done with the presentation. I think an hour will be enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, and good morning once again, colleagues. And yeah, this is indeed a special presentation because, like our Deputy Minister and our Director General has mentioned, that this year has been unique. Firstly, we never had COVID, and many of us in our lifetime never expected to be part of a year that presented such unprecedented challenges. This was the largest examination with over 1 million learners. And I think the cherry on the cake is the fact that despite all these challenges, the class of 2020 was able to prove the kind of resilience, commitment, and perseverance that they have displayed to present to the nation the class and type of results that we are honored to be presenting to the Select Committee this morning. The purpose, and I'm not going to spend time on the purpose, which is the next slide, and the outline, quite elaborate, and I will decide on which aspects to spend more time on, but we want to give the Select Committee on Education and Technology, Sports, Arts and Culture a detailed sense of how the different provinces have done. Now, in my introduction, I'd be failing in my duty, Honorable Chairperson, if I did not go back to the National Development Plan, because it's a National Development Plan that gets us up in the morning and drives us to work in terms of making sure that we present to the children of this country the highest quality education. And this high quality education must manifest in improved learning outcomes. We are possibly not there, but we are certainly on that trajectory of presenting to the children of this country the highest quality education. And this must be confirmed by our performance in standardized tests. And I'm sure at some time, the Select Committee will get a presentation on our performance in TIMS, which was released last year. And this year, we are administering PEARLS, which looks at language competency. It's also important in terms of the next slide to just look at the size and shape of the basic education sector. And it's just to remind honorable members that we have a total of 13 million learners comprising of 673 independent learners coming from independent schools, 12 million learners from our public schools, 442,000 teachers in total, 25,000 schools. I just want to apologize for one error on this slide. On the left block, when we talk about learners, it's the total number of learners. So it's supposed to be 13,216,472. And thank you, DM, for bringing that to our attention. Moving on to the class of 2020, which is the class that we are very much interested in. The year 2020, as already mentioned, will possibly go down in the annals of history as the year that presented this class with challenges that no other class has ever experienced. They entered grade 1 in 2009. And if we want to look at grade R, it means they would have entered grade R in 2008. Now, the department must be complimented for doing the best they could to insulate this class. And I think it's that kind of special opportunities that were provided to this class that allowed them to demonstrate this kind of performance that we will see in this report. On the next slide, I just paint in an illustration some of the unique challenges that they had to face. And we're all aware of them, and therefore I'm not going to spend time. But I think the fact that teachers were not always able to be at school also had its own unique challenges. Moving on to the profile of the class of 2020, which I've alluded to in some way on the next slide. I think what is important and what would have been a head start for this particular class is that we stressed school-based assessment. We're certainly not where we are, and Umalusi will point some of those challenges, but we've certainly made significant progress in terms of the quality and the standard of school-based assessment. And together with that, there was an even greater focus on formative component of school-based assessment, where assessment is used more for learning rather than just for the purpose of making a judgment on how well learners have performed. And the fact that the standard of our question papers have been improving has also assisted this class in getting a clear sense of what the standard is. On the next slide, DM alluded to the fact that this was the first group that had to go through a grade 12 exam where progressed learners were not allowed to MEO. In other words, they were not allowed to write 3 and 4 and 5 subjects. So if you were a progress learner would be a learner who would have not passed grade 11 in his second attempt, or would have not passed grade 10 in his or her second attempt. And such learners would have been progressed. And despite the fact that these learners were progressed, you will find later in my presentation in terms of the excellent results they have produced. So this was the first group that were not subjected to the policy on MEO, so they had to write all 7 subjects in the examination, obviously excluding life orientation, which is school-based assessment. We also had the introduction of sign language in 2008. So this is the 3rd year that we have sign language being offered to this class. The technology subject, which promotes the technical stream, also offered for the 3rd year. And very important, in our attempt to make sure that our assessment is more representative, and particularly in the case of examination, we now offer 2 question papers in accounting and business studies. And we think this gives our learners greater opportunity, more time, more mark exposure, and we'll see later what the results are like in terms of this new approach. Also, this particular group enjoyed the benefits of the fact that we no more have a designated list of subjects where only selected subjects allow learners admission to higher education. All subjects now entitle learners, except life orientation, allow learners admission to higher education. Very quickly, just to give you a quick snapshot of the combined examination, which our DG alluded to. We combined the June exam, which should have been written in May, June, with the November examination. And obviously this had its own kind of challenges of additional space. And we had to deal with this larger number in the context of social distancing and the other protocols relating to COVID. And I think that which we are really proud of is the fact that we not only accommodated learners who displayed symptoms, COVID symptoms, but even if a learner tested positive, we were able to accommodate these learners in an isolated environment. So our provincial departments have really gone the extra mile to accommodate our learners in this particular examination. In this particular slide, we just give you a more detailed indication. These are the 2 exams, but each exam had its own subgroup. And what is interesting is that you tested in this one examination, both senior certificate, which is a qualification on its own, and the national senior certificate, which is a qualification on its own. And remember, we're carrying from our past the senior certificate merely to accommodate adults that have not completed the senior certificate. On the next slide, excuse me, just to give you an indication of the total numbers in terms of the breakdown of the five groups and the total numbers, which gives you the figure of over 1 million. Now, what DG has mentioned, and in the next few slides, that this is possibly the strongest group that we've had thus far. If you look at the next slide, we talk about the performance of the 2020 class prior to grade 12. So what we did, prior to them writing the grade 12 exam, we went and looked at their performance in grade 11 and in grade 10. And what we did was we compared the performance of this class when they were in grade 11 with the grade 11 class of the previous year. So in other words, when they were in grade 11 in 2019, we looked at the performance of the grade 11s in 2019, comparing them to the grade 11 class in 2018. And we did the same with this particular group when they were in grade 10 in 2018, and compared that to the performance of the grade 10 class in 2017, the previous year. And if you look at this graph, the first set of graph, where we compare this class at the grade 10 level, you'll find that in all subjects, they performed better, except in life sciences. On the next graph, We also find, and remember, these are selected subjects. Here again, we find them doing better in grade 10 compared to the previous group in most of the subjects. In fact, when you go to grade 11, honorable members, you find that in all subjects, they are doing better. This particular group is doing better than the previous. And that is even demonstrated on the next slide, Chairperson. So this gives us, or this gave us evidence, even prior to the examination, that this is a stronger class. Moving on to the size and scope of the 2020 NSC exam, and I think we look at enrollment figures, and enrollment and registration figures are the same, are a very important indicator of how the system is moving. So it's not just looking at results, but looking at how many learners register for different subjects, and the number of progress learners, the number of part-time learners. All of these are very important indicators. And I'll very quickly try and take our honorable members through some of these statistics. This particular slide just gives us an indication of the size of this examination. And here we're only talking about learners that wrote the full-time examination in terms of learners that were at school on a full-time basis. 607,000 full-time learners, 117,000 part-time, and the examination was administered at 6,872 exam centers. We utilized 80,000 invigilators, and marking, which possibly was the greatest achievement, at 190 centers, with the appointment of 45,000 markers. And even though we appointed 45,000 markers working together in this contained environment over 12 to 16 days, we just want to thank the good Lord that we only had 7 deaths. And I know I say only, but I do this very respectfully. 7 deaths is certainly too much, and we really honor these 7 markers that sacrificed their lives so that marking could be accomplished. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that protocols were observed, and as a result, we were able to limit the loss of life during this particular process. Moving to the next slide, we then look at the full-time enrollments. And I think what is interesting here, honorable members, is to look at the consistency in our numbers from 2017. 629, 624, 616, 607. So it simply confirms that the system is reaching some form of stability in terms of the access to full-time schooling, which is a very positive sign. On the next slide, we then look at the breakdown per province, and I'm sure you'll be very much interested to see what are the figures like over the last 5 years in each of your provinces. Now, the red in the last column represents drops, and we had a total drop nationally of 9,528 learners. And these drops come from 5 of the provinces that are listed in red. But it's interesting that despite the fact that numbers overall dropped in these 5 provinces, in 4 provinces, we had increases. And it'll be interesting for the department to look at a province like Northwest, 5,000 additional learners. I mean, for a small province of 38,000 learners, or 33,000 learners in 2019, 5,000 is a significant increase. And obviously numbers finally impact on performance. Limpopo, a large province, but a drop in 14,000, which is quite significant. Moving on to the next slide, we then look at another very important statistic, which is the number that entered versus the number that wrote. Now, the number that entered would be the number that registered to write the exam by the 15th of March. But what is the number that finally write? Now, in 2020, 607,000 registered, 578,000 finally wrote, which means, as DM has mentioned, they would have written all 6 subjects, including life orientation, which is the 7. So the 578 includes learners that finally sat for all 6 subjects in the examination, and the results are based on the 578,000. But what is important, if you compare the number that wrote in 2020, the 578,000, to the number that wrote in 2019, we have 504,000 that wrote in 2019. So even though the number that registered in 2019 were higher, 616,000, but finally the number that wrote in 2020 is higher. And that is simply because with the termination of the policy on MEO, all progress learners had to write the full examination. So that is a positive in terms of this particular examination, that we had a higher number of learners writing this particular examination. On the next slide, we look at our part-time enrollment, and part-time enrollment is extremely important because this is giving us an indication to what extent are we taking care of the adults who could not achieve the matric, possibly when they were at school. Now, our numbers here have also reached some level of stability at 170,000, but in 2020, because of COVID, our numbers dropped to 117,808, and you will find that, and that's on the next slide, Chairperson, that an even lower number pitched to write the exam. So of the 117,000 part-time candidates that registered, 69,000 finally wrote the examination. And again, understandably so, they were not fully prepared. I suppose the level of anxiety and fear walking into an exam room. And these are adults, so there's also the issue of comorbidities. And that's the reason we had such a low number. But I'm confident, Honorable Chairperson, that we will move back to the high numbers of 170,000, which we looked at in previous years. We also monitor gender, and we can look at the breakdown. And it's interesting, Honorable Chairperson, that our breakdown in terms of gender across all 9 provinces is on the 55-45. Nationally, it's 56-44%. So we have a higher percentage of females, girl learners in the system, not just in terms of percentage, but also in terms of numbers, 339,000 compared to the 267,000 boy learners. So this indicates that our policy that has been promoting the girl learner is continuing to bear fruit. And we see this in the grade 12 data. Here we look at subject enrollment data, and subject enrollment data is critical because we want to make sure that the system is moving learners to select the right kind of subject. Now, Honorable Chairperson and Honorable Members, you will remember that in the last few years, there's been a drop in the BCM subject. And I think the positive sign this year is that if you look at both accounting and business studies, while all other subjects, the numbers have dropped, and that's the numbers in red. In accounting, the numbers nationally increased by 4,000, business studies increased by 3,000. So it simply means that our initiative to get learners back into the BCM subject is also producing the desired outcome. However, Honorable Chairperson, our concern is still the drop in mathematics and physical science. Now remember, because overall numbers dropped in terms of, these are enrollment figures, so you will see drop across more subjects, but the big drop in mathematics is of concern. And obviously, the intention of the department is to see more learners taking maths and a low percentage of learners taking maths literacy. We then move on to the next slide, which looks at progress learners. And this is an important factor that we monitor in the system. Now, obviously, the policy on multiple examination opportunities seem to have impacted on the number of progress learners. The number dropped to 70,565. And one of the reasons is that we introduced additional criteria that had to be satisfied. So it's not just about a learner spending more than 4 years in a phase, but learners also had to attend school regularly, complete the SBA, and this would have contributed to the reduction, but it's a factor that we will continue to investigate. Moving on to special needs, it's an area we're not doing too well. we only had 2,000 learners with special needs. Now, these are learners with severe barriers to learning. We do have other learners who are in our special schools and even in our normal stream schools where we grant concessions, and they are in the normal school. And the 2,161 are learners that are in our special schools that have severe barriers to learning, and 2,161 of them entered and 2,058 of them wrote. And that's the breakdown per provinces. And you'll find that in a number of our provinces, the numbers are still very low. Another very interesting factor that we monitor at all levels is the age of grade 12 learners. And we, on this particular slide, are looking at it per gender. Now, our grade 12 learners should be 18, 19 years of age if they have passed every grade. Now, here, if you look at it, our spike and the tallest bars are for the 18 and 19-year-olds. Now, we've distinguished male from female, boy learners from girl learners. And if you look at the blue graph, that represents the girl learner, and the red graph represents the boy learner. And if you look at it, that we have, in terms of 18-year-olds, we have more girl learners than boy learners. But when you go to the 19, the 20, and the 21, the older, then we find that we have more boy learners than girl learners. So it means we have more older boy learners in the system than girls. So which simply means that girl learners progress through the system more rapidly, possibly without repeating a grade. And this is why the throughput rate of girl learners will be higher. On the next graph, we just represent that using a line graph, and I'm not going to spend time on that. We then look at correctional services, and to think that our learners, while in prison, are still afforded the opportunity to write the exam. 133 full-time learners at correctional services entered, 124 wrote, and we have an additional 55 part-time learners that entered and 48 wrote. On the next slide, which is also another very important slide, and this is something we started doing in the last few years, is to monitor the recipients of social grants. Now, interesting that in total, of the 600,000 learners that wrote, 462,000 learners are recipients of a social grant. But there are two categories of social grant recipients. You have the active and the inactive. The active would mean that they were recipients of a social grant in their grade 12 year. The inactive would be those that would have received a social grant in either grade R, grade 1, or any of the subsequent grades, but the grant would have been terminated in grade 12, simply because the learner turns 18. So there were 105,000 active social grant recipients, 356,000 inactive social grant recipients. And later on, when we look at the performance, we'll look at how these learners have performed in terms of the active versus the inactive. Now we move on to the results, Honorable Chairperson and Honorable Members. And we like starting with this graph because it just gives us a vivid pictorial reminder of where we come from. In 1970, only 43,000 learners attained a matric. And in this period of 50 years, and even if you look at from the 1990s, I mean, they still, 1994, I would assume that our figures would have been around the 200,000 mark. And look at the increase in terms of where we are currently in 2020 with 440,000. So a significant improvement in the number of learners that now have a matric. And of the 440, almost more than 60% of them and I'll give you the accurate figures, qualify for admission to a higher education institution. So this is the good story that we are here to share. The pass rates, if you look at it from 2015, there's been a gradual increase, and therefore we can confidently say that we are a system on the rise. And I think COVID just prevented this class from demonstrating their true worth and their true potential. In the absence of COVID, this class of 2020 would certainly have surpassed the 81.3 percentage. Going on to the next table, which is possibly one of the important tables that gives you an indication of how the different provinces have fared. And I think there's been a lot said about, ranking provinces and league tables, but I think we present it in a context of saying that this is not the ultimate objective of seeing how provinces are ranked. But I think for me, what is more important is to look at how a province has done in 2019, 2018, and how they're now doing in 2020. And for me, I think the rank order has remained more or less the same. But obviously, the concern is the last column, the figures in red, where we're seeing the drops. Again, it's about a province comparing itself to its own previous performance. And I think our concern are the provinces with the big drops: Northwest, Northern Cape, Eastern Cape. And these are provinces that we need to monitor more strongly in 2021. And if you look at it, our better performing provinces had the least drops of 3.2, Western Cape 2.4. So that's the rank order. And I think there are certainly particular provinces who are moving. Now, something interesting, and this is part of our drive to make sure that the equity redress drive is maintained in all that we do. And what we've done here, Honorable Chairperson, is to look at this overall performance coming from the previous slide in terms of fee-paying schools and non-fee paying schools. And we also compared this to the independent schools. Now, the independent schools that I'm referring to here are the independent schools that write the public exam. It's interesting that more independent schools write the public exam than independent schools that write the private exam. There would not be more than 250, 300 independent schools that write the private examination. So the bulk of the independent schools write the public examination. So this again is a vote of confidence by these independent schools in the public examination system. Now, here we're looking at fee paying versus non-fee paying. Now, I want to focus on the non-fee paying category for just a few seconds. In other words, if we had to look at just the non-fee paying schools, these would be your quintiles 1, 2, and 3 schools, our disadvantaged schools. You would now see what the performance of our provinces would be. And I think the significant province that we need to take note of here would be KZN. KZN, in terms of performance in the non-fee paying schools, would have been ranked 3. So it simply means that KZN is doing something positive. Now, Western Cape, unfortunately, in terms of non-fee paying schools, is not doing too well. So I think one gets a sense of how the context determines the performance of different schools. Fee paying, again, if one looks at KwaZulu-Natal, in terms of its fee paying school, it's not doing too well. It would have been ranked 8th in terms of its fee paying school. But the other important point is that if you were to compare our fee paying schools with our independent schools, there's not much difference. Our fee paying schools are performing at 85%, and our independent schools are performing at 87%. And the 2% different, statisticians will tell us, is not highly significant. So this is one of the important slides. We now move on to looking at qualification types. Your admission to bachelor studies, which is on the next slide, admission to your diploma studies, Moving on to the next slide. Are we having a problem with the slides there? Slides are not, okay, thank you very much. Next slide. Yeah, here again, Honorable Chairperson, is a good story to tell. If you look at the bottom row, the number of learners that achieved bachelor's, 210,820. And if you look at the number that achieved admission to diploma studies, 150,000. So if you combine those two figures, 360,000 of the 400,000 learners now attain admission to higher education institutions. So this is really a positive, and one can see the breakdown in terms of the individual provinces. And in terms of our bachelor attainment, which I will look at in the next few slides, we can flip on to the next slide. The next slide gives us what has been the percentage attainment in terms of bachelors. And again, we see a manifestation of a system on the rise from 25.8 in 2015 to 36.9 in 2019, and a slight drop of 0.5 in 2020. On the next slide, we look at it in terms of numbers, and I think numbers are a little more convincing in terms of the difference that is being made in the lives of learners. 210,000. So in 2020, coming from the class of 2020, despite COVID and the size of the exam, 210,000 learners, which is the highest that we've had thus far, attained admission to bachelor studies. And then moving on to the next slide, which you would be interested to know as to how your province is contributing to the figure of 210,000. KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng are the biggest contributors given their size, and they contribute almost 50% of the admission to bachelor studies, and then our smaller provinces. Moving on to the next slide, which is the bachelor achievement. The next slide, the bachelor achievement, we're just comparing 2019 with 2020. On the next slide, please. Yeah, and here you could look at how the provinces have compared with regard to their 2019 performance. Again, the red represents drops in percentage. But what is important here is that even though the percentage would have dropped, the numbers have increased. So in the case of Eastern Cape, the percentage dropped from 32 to 30, but the number increased from 20,000 to 21,000. So overall, what we're presenting is a positive picture despite percentages. I think percentages are important, but percentages are merely giving us part of this of the story. And obviously Mpumalanga, Northwest and Northern Cape that have also dropped in terms of the percentage performance. Then moving to the next slide, which looks at the types of passes in terms of fee paying and non-fee paying. And I'm not going to go through this particular slide. It looks a little bit complicated, but I'm sure in your own time, you would want to look at this particular slide and compare fee paying with non-fee paying. On this slide, which is possibly one of the most important slides, honorable members, here again, we're comparing our quintiles 1, 2, and 3 schools with our quintile 4 and 5 schools in terms of contribution to admission to bachelor studies. Now, if you look at the table at the bottom, in 2020, 115,000 of the bachelors or admission to bachelor studies come from quintiles 1, 2, and 3, and 83,000 come from quintiles 4 and 5. So your quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools, and obviously they are the larger number, so they are the biggest contributors in terms of admission to bachelor study. And if you look at it in comparison to 2019, you can see the improvement in quintiles 1 to 3, and even 4 and 5 from 96,000 to 115,000, 78,000 to 83,000. So this is the improvement that we're talking about all across the board. On the next slide, we talk about the performance of the class of 2020 if there were no progress learners. And I think DM alluded to this in her introductory comment. Now, this is an important point, not that we are wanting to exclude progress learners, but it's just to show you the strength of the class of 2020. Now, if you excluded progress learners from the class of 2020, our performance would have been 81.2. Now, if you compare that to 2019, and where progress learners were excluded, the performance was 82.3. So the difference in terms of performance between 2019 and 2020, excluding progress learners, is just 1.1. So I think what we're saying is that as much as COVID contributed to the drop in terms of percentage in 2020, the fact that all progress learners now had to write all subjects was the other contributory factor to the drop in performance. So I think we need to bear that in mind, that bringing all progress learners, getting them to write the exam in 2020 did contribute to the drop in the percentage. But the positive was we now have ensured more learners are now attaining the matric. In the next slide, we'll look at the performance of progress learners on their own. And again, 24,000 of the 65,000 learners that wrote attained the NSC, and that constitutes 37%, which is very much similar to what we saw in 2019. But here comes a very interesting slide. Now, this is looking at our progress learners in terms of the number that achieved admission to bachelor's, the number that achieved admission to diploma studies. And I always want to remind whoever I speak to, that when you look at the slide, think about it as learners that would have been languishing in grade 11 or in grade 10 because they failed twice. So if it were not for the policy of progression, these learners would have been in grade 11 or grade 10. But given a chance, 3,026 of our progress learners attained admission to bachelor studies. Another 10,000 attained admission to diploma studies. So we're talking about 13,000 learners that would have been in grade 10 and 11 that can now enter a higher education institution. And we see the breakdown across the different provinces. So this, again, is another good story to tell. Going to the next few slides where we look at the school performance in terms of quintile. And I think here we're looking at quintile 1 to 5, and we look at the performance in terms of the different categories, 0 to 19, 20 to 39, and the like. And the block, the red block, talks about or refers to schools coming from quintiles 1, 2, and 3 that scored above 80%. Now, if you look at that red block on the left, 1,700 and a little more of the 2,661 schools that scored above 80% come from quintiles 1, 2, and 3. And even if we have to look at the schools that scored 100%, I think there are about 170 of the 302 schools that come from quintiles 1, 2, and 3. So certainly as government, we're doing extremely well in terms of supporting the underprivileged schools, the previously under-resourced schools, and that's the only reason that we can display this kind of performance. Moving on to performance in the different subjects, and this obviously is an area we monitor very closely. And obviously what we're seeing on the board is not a good picture because we're seeing more reds in the 2020 column than blacks, which means that in accounting, agricultural science, economics, geography, life orientation, life sciences, maths, physical science, our performance has dropped if we look at the 30%. Again, we dropped in terms of percentages, but not necessarily in terms of numbers. Now, interesting again, business studies, our performance has improved, history, our province has improved, and in maths, literacy. And certainly, history is one of the subjects that we're doing extremely well. But the next slide is a slide that points to quality. Now, I know there's been, hula baloo about the fact that we have a very low threshold of passing, 30%. But if we were to judge the performance of this class of 2020 based on 40%, this would be what the performance is like. Now, it is low, and it's certainly something we need to work on. But the point that I want to make is that if you look at the number of reds, which shows drops, has decreased, which certainly means that at the 40% level, our learners are doing better. And this is a positive, but it also points to the impact of COVID, that our better performing learners were still able to do well in comparison to previous classes. But the biggest impact of COVID was really experienced by our poor performing learners who were not able to cope, obviously, with this new environment and the challenges. So something that we would be monitoring moving forward is to look at how our learners are performing at the higher level. On the next slide, we look at the performance in the languages, and our languages are certainly doing extremely well, and they've retained the 99% threshold of performance. On the next slide, we look at the first additional language, and this class of 2020 did better than the class of 2019, as well as the class of 2018 and 2017 in the case of English first additional language. Moving on to district performance, which is the next slide. Now, our districts have not done as well as we've done in 2019. If you look at 2019, the bottom yellow row, we had only 6 districts performing below 70%. This is 2019. Of the 75, 6 districts performed below 70%, and the bulk of our districts performed above 70% or 70% and above. Now, if you look at the next slide, you'll find that the number of districts performing at 70% and below has increased to 19. And these 19 districts come from Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and Northern Cape. And obviously, as part of our district intervention and support, these 19 districts would become the focus of 2021. For what it's worth, Honorable Chair, we present to you the top 10 districts. It's not that we're undermining the performance of the other districts, but just to give you a sense, and obviously if you're from Gauteng, 6 of the top 10 districts are from Gauteng, 3 from the Free State, and 1 from the Western Cape. So Gauteng takes the lead in terms of the top performing district. The bottom 10 districts, again, we don't want to name and shame, but it's part of our monitoring to make sure that if you are in the bottom 10 this year, we don't want to see you there next year. And these are our bottom 10 districts, and the provinces are in the main Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, Limpopo. Yeah, that's it. We then move to special needs, and I did indicate that our numbers are increasing, but they're not where they need to be. And so we had 2,058 learners that finally wrote in terms of our special needs learners. And here's the good story to share. 943 of the 2,058 attained admission to bachelor's. 582 attained admission to diploma studies. And the number that did not achieve of the 2,058 is only 287. So our special schools are certainly doing well, even though our numbers are small. And this gives you the breakdown of the different barriers to learning that these learners are confronted with and are still able to perform at that particular level. We then move on to the next slide. which looks at the performance of our part-time candidates. Now, part-time candidates write 1 and 2 subjects. They don't write the full subject package, but I can indicate, Honorable Chairperson, that our part-time learners improved. If you look at it in terms of percentage, obviously the numbers will be lower because it's a smaller number of learners that wrote. But if you look at it in terms of percentage, I think across all subjects, they've improved. Accounting, 37% in 2019, 47% in 2020, 42, 49, 34, 53. And in some cases, the improvements are significant. History, 59 to 70. So our part-time learners are doing well. We also judge the system, honorable members, by looking at our top performers. As much as we want to focus on our medium and our lower performing learners, but we also monitor the distinction. Now, this class of 2020 outperformed the class of 2019 in terms of distinctions, both in terms of numbers as well as in terms of percentages. We had 156,000 distinctions in 2019. In 2020, we had 177,000 distinctions. And if you look at the percentage, 3.9, we've improved to 4.3. Only Northwest, the percentage dropped from 3.4 to 2.9. But like I said, when looking at the performance of Northwest, look at it in the context that it was the one province that had the highest increase in terms of enrollment figures. So you can see the breakdown, and KZN is the biggest contributor to distinctions, 49,000. I mean, they missed the 50,000 by one candidate. Okay, so that's the distinction. And on the next slide, honorable members, we then look at distinctions in terms of different subjects. And again, we're seeing a general improvement, except Afrikaans, Taal, life sciences, maths, lit, and physical sciences. Obviously, our performance in physical science was not where it needed to be. And that's something we need to work on moving into 2021. Now, here comes another very interesting slide. We monitor the number of distinctions that are scored by our progress candidates. Now, I don't want to focus on the comparison, but I want to look at the 2020. Now, those are the figures in the second last column. But let's look at the number of distinctions that has come from progress learners in 2020. And if my eyesight is good enough, the figures are quite small. There are 15 distinctions coming from progress learners in mathematics and 16 distinctions coming from progress learners in physical science. Here again, learners that would have been retained in grade 11, given an opportunity, are scoring distinction. So it shows that no learner must be written off. They can sprout and blossom even in the final lap of the race. In the next few slides, Honorable Chairperson, and I'm mindful of the time, we look at the achievement by age. And I presented in the initial slides the number of learners in terms of age and gender related to age. Here we're looking at the performance in terms of the different age groups. Now, if you look at it, our peaks are at age 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And as the age increases, the performance decreases. And you see that decrease up to age 24. Now, I know that's not a positive sign to say that we have 25, 26, 27-year-olds in the system. I mean, that's something we are tending to, and it's not good to have 28 and 29-year-olds with 16 and 17-year-olds. So that is something we must gradually move out of the system into more appropriate forms of teaching and learning. But it's interesting that the older learners, given their maturity level, are doing better than some of your younger learners at 19 and 20. So this is now the performance overall nationally. And on the next slide, we then compare the next slide, line graph, which is very confusing. We look at all provinces, and you'll find that there are similar trends with a few peaks and drops. And I think that comes from Western Cape. But the general trend is that your 17, 18-year-olds are the best performers. There's a slight drop up to about 24 years, and then it rises again. And for your information, honorable members, we've presented these slides for each of the provinces in the subsequent slide. And you'll find that in the next slide, which is the Eastern Cape, you see the same kind of pattern. The next slide, which is the Free State, interesting. Free State has a slightly different, it's just a general drop. And then we move to Gauteng, where we see the same kind of trend. If you move on to the next slide, which is also looking at the other provinces, Limpopo and then Mpumalanga, where we're seeing the same kind of pattern right down to Northwest, Northern Cape, and I'm not going to spend time on these. And I spoke about Western Cape and those jumps at those particular age levels. And this slide gives you the performance in terms of gender at these different age levels, and the performance is pretty much the same. Moving on to the next slide, we now look at social grants, and I did mention earlier that the performance in this category is important. And again, our social grants recipients overall performed at 65.8%. And on the next slide, which is the interesting slide, is to now compare the active recipients from the inactive recipients. Now, the important point, your honorable members, is that your active recipients, those that would have received a grant in the grade 12 year, are performing at 84.04%, higher than the national pass rate, while your inactives are performing at 60.97. Now, the question we're asking ourselves, which needs further investigation, does it mean that the termination of the grant in the grade 12 year, or by the time the learner reaches grade 12, impacts on performance? And this is something we need to investigate with our relevant departments, and also explore whether learners at school could still be provided with a grant until they complete schooling. And you can look at how the different provinces perform in terms of social grant. On the next slide, we look at the performance per gender. And here we find that the boys, in terms of percentage, are doing better than the girls, 64 versus, rather 67 versus 64. But the numbers are still higher in terms of the girls, 182,000 versus 140. So one always needs to look at percentages versus numbers and not percentages on their own. Moving to correctional services, very quickly, Honorable Chairperson, time is flying. Of the 124 learners that wrote, even though 133 registered, 124 wrote, 71 of them attained admission to bachelor's, 23 admission to diploma studies, 13 higher certificate, and so we had a total of 107 of them that attained the matric certificate at 86.3%. So for the small numbers, our learners in prison are doing well. And on the next slide, we look at the part-time learners, and even in the case of part-time learners, of the 48 that wrote, 23 of them passed. Now I want to move to the new approach to reporting, which we refer to as the inclusive basket. The inclusive basket merely says that do not judge the performance of a school, district, province, or even the country on the basis of just one factor or one indicator, which is overall pass percentage. Look at it in terms of a group of indicators. And these group of indicators will give you a more representative picture of how different provinces, districts are performing. And these are the 7 different indicators. We've added on maths performance, physical science performance, bachelor attainment, distinction, and participation rate together with throughput rate, and that is the weighting. Now, on the next table, you now see, and again, I think although we've done it here, we've come up with an aggregated score and a what we're calling a basket score. I think we must not move to ranking, although we do it because we know that we're all interested in ranking for some reason or the other. But it will be good just to judge provinces in terms of these 7 criteria. Now, what is interesting, Chair, is to look at different provinces, and I want to look at possibly a province like KwaZulu-Natal. Now, if you look at KwaZulu-Natal, in terms of the overall achievement score, they get an achievement score of 5.1. Remember, it's sorry, not 5.1, but 23.3 out of a weighting of 35%. Okay. But if you look at their maths achievement, they're not doing too well, and therefore we colored it amber, okay, 5.1. But what KZN is doing well is in all the other indicators, in terms of maths participation, they rank in the upper levels, in the physical science achievement, in the bachelor's achievement, distinction, and therefore they have a green or a light green. Now, on the other hand, and I want to look at Western Cape for one factor only. Now, if you look at Western Cape, they're not doing well in terms of maths participation. They possibly rank in the lowest in terms of maths participation. And then I want to go to Free State. Free State is our #1 province. But if you look at Free State in terms of their throughput, they are in the lowest, 4.9%. So this gives you, and I think one needs to look at the reds in this picture. And if you are regarded as a top performing province, you should not have reds and ambers, because that's an area. I mean, Gauteng has a 3.4% in terms of maths participation, which means they need to improve their maths participation. Time is against us, Honorable Chairperson, and therefore I want to run. In the next few slides, we take each of those 7 criteria and rank the different provinces. Now, what is interesting, we take the inclusive basket and evaluate each of the districts in terms of the inclusive basket. We even evaluate every school in terms of the inclusive basket. And all of this information is provided to schools, to districts, so that we're hoping that very soon we're not going to talk about just overall pass percentage, but we'll talk about the inclusive basket, which gives you a better picture. This slide, Honorable Chairperson, provides a summary just to convince all of us that this class of 2020 was a better performing class than 2019. If you look at across each of these factors, they have done better. And I'm not going to spend time on that because I want to move towards closure. In terms of the summary of achievement, now, Deputy Minister continuously warns us that let's judge the system by the extent to which we are promoting access, redress, equity, efficiency, quality, because these are the fundamental principles that we need to evaluate our performance. And in the next few slides, we take the exam results and look at it in terms of access and show you how, if we take each of these 5 criteria, and in fact, we've included inclusivity, which is 6, the metric results are showing us that there is improvement in these 5 criteria. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but you could look at this in terms of equity and how we're promoting the girl learner, quality, how we're doing well in terms of subjects, efficiency, what we're doing in terms of progress learners, inclusivity. I think I've spoken about that, and that's the summary. And in the next few slides, Umalusi will be presenting their report on what are the issues they've picked up in terms of exam administration, exam processes. And we take the Umalusi report seriously. Umalusi provides us with clear directives on what we need to deal with. We may not be as swift in terms of making sure we get to what Umalusi wants us to achieve, but we're definitely getting there. So we take each of their suggestions. For example, with regard to question papers, there are certain technical issues that we're not complying with. And we're hoping that we will be able to deal with this by having a review session with all our examiners. Our examiners need more training, so we're putting together a training program. School-based assessment is certainly our Achilles heel, and here we're looking at developing some kind of an exam guideline for our schools, which teachers could use in terms of developing tasks that are of the appropriate level. Marking, we've done well, but obviously Umalusi raises the issue of the pre-marking, where the 20 scripts that should be pre-marked are not being done. And this year it was a little bit difficult to manage that because of COVID, but it's an area that we are dealing with, and we can move on to monitoring. We're doing the same, irregularities, and this is just picking up some of the key issues raised by Umalusi, but we have a detailed plan. And irregularities, obviously, as mentioned, the leakage of maths and physical science certainly is a serious blemish to an otherwise well-managed and efficient exam administration. But however, the black spot is a black spot, and the black spot will always attract attention. And we will do the best we can in terms of bringing in new technologies, new security measures across our provinces to make sure that we do not have a repeat of these leakages. In conclusion, Honorable Chairperson, honorable members, I think you and I would agree with me that the class of 2020 will certainly enter the annals of history as the class that displayed total resilience and utter determination to achieve. But that kind of resilience has come because of the contributions and the sacrifices of parents, teachers, NGOs, members of the community, and also our members of parliament, the select committee, the portfolio committee, who've been there to support our minister, deputy minister, and DG in terms of doing the best they could in terms of not just salvaging the 2020 academic year, but producing this kind of performance. And I think finally, our tribute goes to the educators that succumbed to the virus in the line of duty. And we are saying, you educators who sacrificed by making the ultimate sacrifice of your lives will be hailed as the martyrs of education, and you will be forever remembered. And finally, to all provinces, heads of department who've really gone the extra mile, and particularly to our members of the different committees, you certainly would not understand the critical role you play in supporting and making sure that we do what we need to do. So thank you very much for your time, and sorry that I actually took about an hour, and I hope that I've done justice to what you wanted to hear. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thanks a lot, Prof, and thanks for the, am I audible?
Yes, Chair, you are.
Yes, Chairperson.
Oh yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot, Umalusi, Prof, and your team for the untiring endeavors, to ensure that, our exams are standardized and that there are process and procedures that are followed to ensure that there are no queries at the end, that everybody is satisfied that the systems we use work for us. But there are some issues that I would like us to look at, particularly in terms of performances in the particularly rural provinces. You look at the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, to some extent, KwaZulu-Natal, because those are the areas and provinces with high enrollment every year. The enrollment numbers increases. But at the same time, you do get schools in those areas and regions that that are in a way dealing with same issues under same conditions, but people produce different results. Is it because of maybe management, DG? Is it because of maybe of management of the schools, or is it maybe allocation, for instance, of teachers to subject that where they are comfortable teaching them? Like, let's say, for instance, you get a school that does not have a maths teacher, or the maths teacher is not really that much qualified to be teaching mathematics at that level. And then we still accept the school to perform. I'm just saying that, some of the challenges are indeed systemic. They are in the system. What is it that the department can do to make sure that we change this thing around and ensure that there is, we acknowledge where people have done good, but at the same time where people have not done the right things, like perpetual underperformance, something needs to be done. What happened to those schools? Is the problem of administration of the management of the school? Or is it maybe, I really don't know what might be the causes, DM, but what is this that you are doing to ensure that children get qualified teachers who teach the subjects that they are given to? Honorable members, this the presentation. Let us engage. I'll wait for the members to.
We have lost you, Chair.
DM, I thought in the meantime,
Or maybe, sorry,
there's also a presentation of Umalusi.
Yeah, that we deal with Umalusi, and then we'll do all the questions after Malusi has presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Let's give over to the DG and Prof to do that. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Honorable Chairperson, also to the Deputy Minister Mali, and of course all the honorable members of the Select Committee, the DG, Mr. Matanzima Mweri, and the delegation of the DBE. It's an honor for us to be part of this meeting today. And I would like to introduce the delegation that will be doing the presentation. Dr. Mafu Rakumetsi, who is the CEO of Umalusi, and Ms. Zodwa Modimakwani, she's the Executive Manager, Quality Assurance. Mr. Emmanuel Sibanda is Executive Manager, Qualifications and Research. And then there's Ms. Mary Louise Madalani, who is the Senior Manager, Quality Assurance of Assessment. And then Ms. Stella Mosimer, Senior Manager, Strategy and Governance. And lastly, Mr. Lakidito Anyani, Senior Manager, Public Relations. Honorable members, we are delighted to be given the opportunity to present our report on the work of Umalusi to the Select Committee. And we will focus on the Umalusi's quality assurance of assessment. That is the mandate that we have. And we know that the 2020 academic year was probably the most challenging year for all education sectors, not only in this country, as the DM has said, but all over the world. And on behalf of Council I am delighted to inform the honorable members that we managed to deal with that challenge and together with our assessment bodies. Also on behalf of the council, I know that the honorable members are aware that we sadly lost one of our council members, Mr. Temba Kujana, due to COVID-19. And we are extremely sad about that. Not only because he was a council member, but he played a very important role as a head of education in the Eastern Cape. And he's been a personal friend to many of us. And so we feel his loss today. We also convey our deepest condolences to the learners and teachers and managers, educational officials, and honorable members who also have lost their friends and relatives during this time. But today's report focuses on the processes followed by Umalusi to quality assure the entire value chain of the 2020 national assessment processes. And that includes the standardization of the end of the year national senior certificate and senior certificate amended examination results. I want to say that Council is satisfied that once again, the organization has diligently delivered on its quality assurance mandate through the oversight role of one of its committees, the Assessment Standards Committee. And as a committee of Council, the ASC worked very hard in January and February this year to standardize the 2020 examination results. So to this end, Council announced its approval of the 2020 national examination results on the 15th of February, after satisfying itself that based on the evidence presented to it by the DBE, the conduct of the 2020 examinations was fair and credible. But it is worth noting that despite the leakage of mathematics paper 2 and physical sciences paper 2, those question papers, the Executive Committee of Council determined that based on the evidence, available evidence that was presented by the DBE, there were no systemic irregularities that could have compromised the overall integrity of the exams. And so for this reason, Umalusi always commends the Department of Basic Education for once again successfully administering and conducting and managing the 2020 NSC examinations. Honorable Chairperson, I am now going to give over to Dr. Rakometi to lead the presentation of Umalusi. We look forward to a fruitful engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Volmink, Honorable Chairperson of the Select Committee, Honorable Deputy Minister, colleagues from the Department of Basic Education, honorable members of the Select Committee on Education and Technology, Sports, Arts and Culture, colleagues, good morning. And thank you for the opportunity that is presented to us to present to the committee how we executed our mandate of quality assurance for the 2020 DBE National Senior Certificate Examinations. Marie-Louise, are you going to display the presentation? Hello? Zodwa, Marie-Louise in the meeting?
Yes, you are.
Marie-Louise, can you respond, please? Thank you very much. Can you do a PowerPoint presentation display? Thank you. Slideshow? Slideshow, please. Thank you. And I proceed, Chairperson.
Just let them in.
Thank you very much. The presentation outline will be as follows, that we are going to focus on the Umalusi mandate and regulatory framework. Can you move the slide, please? Framework for quality assurance of assessment, the quality assurance processes undertaken in 2020, the scope of the 2020 quality assurance of assessment, the areas of improvement, tracking of directives for compliance 2018 to 2020, standardization and resulting. We're going to come up with some recommendations and we'll conclude the presentation, Honorable Chairperson. First of all, focus will be on the Umalusi's mandate and regulatory framework. And we need to indicate that we derive our mandate, first of all, from the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, and also from two very important pieces of legislation, namely the National Qualifications Framework Act number 67 of 2008. In particular, you could look at sections 27H and 27I of the NQF Act. And then another piece of legislation is the General and Further Education and Training Quality Assurance Act, as amended in 2008. There, our focus will be on section 17A, which states that the council must perform the external moderation of assessment of all assessment bodies and educational institutions, that the council may adjust raw marks during the standardization process, that the council, with the concurrence of the Director General and after consultation with the relevant assessment body or education institution, approve the publication of the results of learners if the council is satisfied that the assessment body or education institution has satisfied the conditions that warrant such an approval. Having said that, we need to look also at the framework that we use for quality assurance of assessment. And the framework we use is on a number of pillars and on a number of stages that we go through in order to ensure that the certificates that we issue are credible. And this happens in schools, adult education and training centers, and also at vocational education and training colleges. We moderate examination question papers. We moderate practical assessment tasks. We moderate common assessment tasks. And in the case of life orientation, it is common assessment tasks. We monitor and moderate the school-based assessment. We monitor the conduct, administration, and management of assessment and examinations processes. We do the moderation and monitoring of marking. We manage concessions and examination irregularities. Further on, we do the standardization of results, and then we approve the release of results. Now, Umalusi did its work in 2020, and if you look at the picture for 2020, we had in total 726,335 learners for the Department of Basic Education. And we compared that statistic with 2018 and 2019, and the figures are there for the members to see for themselves. And they are full-time and part-time candidates writing under the DBE. The NSC is also administered by the Independent Examinations Board, which has a total of 13,163. And you can do a comparison also with the 2018-2019 figures. And it is also administered by the South African Comprehensive Assessment Institute, SACAI. And even there, you can look at the figures, 2018, 2019, 2020. The figures are speaking for themselves, and they can tell you that there was a lot of work to do in 2020 because of the challenges of COVID-19. As though these challenges were not enough, the problem was compounded by the shifting of examinations from June 2020 to November 2020 due to the global outbreak of COVID-19. And then we add also the numbers of the students who are doing senior certificate amended. And that the total there is 168. Now, I'm going to hand over to Marie-Louise to continue the presentation. with your permission, Honorable Chairperson, and then I'll conclude the presentation at the end. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. Good morning, DM. Good morning, Dr. Moyeli, and colleagues from the DBE as well as from Umalusi. I'm going to be looking at the quality assurance processes that we conducted for this year. Umalusi moderated and approved 142 DBE NSC November 2020 question papers, and we moderated those as well as their marking guidelines, which we did that through from January until September 2020. And between October and November 2020, we moderated school-based assessment in 13 selected subjects across the 9 provinces and verified the moderation of practical assessment tasks or PETs for 5 subjects in 5 provinces. And the state of readiness was also conducted. State of readiness to conduct examinations was also conducted across all the 9 provinces. And Umalusi monitored a sample of 446 examination centers and 32 marking centers across the 9 PEDs. Umalusi attended and participated in 133 marking guideline standardization meetings. 34 subjects were sampled for verification of marking across the 9 PEDs. The DBE presented a total of 65 subjects for standardization of the November 2020 NSC examinations, and they also presented 35 subjects for the SC examinations. And all the irregularities that were identified during the conduct of the examinations were dealt with appropriately by the PEIC. Those are the committees that look at the irregularities in the different provinces. And the challenges were captured appropriately and presented to Umalusi. And Umalusi has a detailed report on the issues, and we have shared that with the DBE. And if you have noted when Dr. Polia was presenting, he was referring to this report with all those directives that we have issued and how they plan to deal with them. Now I'm going to look at the different aspects individually here. Moderation of question papers, like I've indicated, the number of question papers that we have moderated. And the slide here is it's comparing the different years, 2017 to 2020, how the DBE has fared. Question papers are submitted to us for moderation. And if it goes through the first moderation, we classify that it has complied to all the criteria at the first moderation. But there are cases where question papers come to us several times, up to about 5 times. Let's look at November 2020. Question papers of November 2020, none of them came back to Umalusi for the 4th or the 5th moderation. They made it at least at first and second, that's the highest numbers there. Only a few came in for the 3rd moderation, and that's an improvement if you look at the other 3 columns where we still have question papers that came for the 4th moderation. Then when we did the moderation of question papers, there were areas of improvement that were noted. An increase in the number of question papers that complied fully with the following 6 criteria. The criteria is listed there, and that is what I was saying in the previous slide, that they made the cut of either 1st or 2nd moderation. There was an increase in the number of question papers that were approved at 1st moderation as compared to the previous years. But throughout the years, we also note the issues that are of concern, and we list them as directives to the department that we need them to improve on those. And from these directives, that's where then they provide us with a plan that Dr. Polia was talking about. Here you can see 2018, 19, 20, the 3 years, and we then stipulate the progress in 2020 of actually what happened. The directives, there are several of them, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to be talking to all of them. I'm going to look at those ones where they have not complied and what we want them to do going forward. On this slide, you can see that there is compliance throughout the 3 that are indicated here. And the department, we appreciate the improvement in that space. Here, internal moderation is at 80%. It also complied. I'm not going to look at that slide once more, like I've indicated. Then we can go to the next process, which is the moderation of school-based assessment. We conducted school-based assessment in the selected subjects as listed: accounting, agricultural sciences, business studies, economics, English first additional language, geography, history, life sciences, mathematical literacy, mathematics, physical sciences, South African Sign Language, home language, as well as technical sciences. And that was done in the provinces, the Free State, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, Northern Cape, and Western Cape. And the subjects are listed, which subjects of the pairs were moderated in the listed provinces. Now, with the SBA moderation areas of improvement, the following were noted as improvements: the use of cognitive analysis grid in accounting, that was noted in KZN, and that is an improvement from what we have seen in 2019. The creation of a safe ICT system with secure drives to conduct fair, valid, and reliable assessment for the retrospective exhibition and the final NSC practical examination by the Western Cape PD for visual arts. And there was also an improved quality of tests at Philadelphia School of the Deaf as compared to what we have noted in 2019. Once more, we issued directives, and here we are still comparing the 3 years. The first directive, which was partially compliant, that the quality of assurance of assessment in subjects with the practical component for both the practical assessment task and practical examination is attended to. It's a bit of a concern for us as far as this is concerned, and we have issued this directive that the DBE needs to look at that. And the last column, progress in 2080, we have noted that non-submission of oral and sight reading for moderation before the commencement of practical examination was not there. There was poor management and monitoring of the presentation and assessment requirements for EGD PET. We also had a concern with the second one, and we wanted the DBE to ensure that adherence to subject assessment policies in all subjects in all provinces is strengthened. Since that was partially complied with, we have found out that there was lack of compliance as far as that is concerned. Again, there was partial compliance to the matter of recycle tasks, and we directed the DBE that they must ensure that the use of recycled tasks and scheduling marking in SBA is discouraged through effective internal moderation processes, since we have noted in the subjects listed there in the third column of issues that relate to this particular directive. And the DBE is aware of this. We then expect them to deal with the matter in this year. Again, still for SBA, there was partial compliance. We noted that there was evidence of moderation across all levels. However, there is still poor or lack of moderation of SASL home language tests at all levels, and we have issued a directive for the DBE to look at that. Also, another item that was partially complied with, the quality of tests at Philadelphia, there is an improvement in quality of tests at Philadelphia School, but there was lack of moderation of tests at all levels, and that is what I've also indicated in the previous item, and a directive is issued on that note for the DBE. Again, furthermore, for SBA, there are still a few that needs to be attended to. There, the DBE must make sure that teachers are capacitated on item development to improve the quality of assessment tasks. Again, another item which was partially complied with, we asked the DBE to ensure that adherence to CAPS with regard to conduct and administration of SBA oral and practical assessment tasks is taken care of. Further, for SBA, the first one there was complied with. The second one, which was partially complied with, we request the DBE that teachers on development of use of marking guidelines and rubrics for marking, they need to be capacitated in that regard, since we noted that there was poor usage or understanding of rubrics in the marking of literary essays in English file. Then the next one, there was non-compliance again for visual arts was not moderated in Limpopo. No, this one we moderated in 2019, seeing in 2020, it was not selected as a subject for moderation. Hence, you see there is no comment for it. But in 2021, we are going to do the moderation of visual arts, and we'll report on that at the end of 2021. Then we go to the next process, which is the audit of appointed markers. Before marking commences, Umalusi audits the list of all the markers that are appointed in preparation for the marking of the end of the year. And during that process, we noted a few areas of improvement. In the Eastern Cape, foreign qualifications of the appointed marking personnel were endorsed by the South African Qualifications Authority, SAQA, and or the Eastern Cape Department of Education. Submission of Annexure C, declaration by marking personnel by the Western Cape PED, indicated if the appointed marking personnel had a child, children, or relatives in grade 12, and provision of a contingency plan regarding the appointment of markers by the Western Cape PED, those were appreciated. However, we still had directives issued because not all items that relate to this process were complied with. We've got one that was partially complied with, and we request that the DBE must ensure that the PED verify qualifications of markers at all levels before appointments are made, since we have noted that in certain provinces that we did find during the audit that there were markers whose credentials or qualification transcripts did not really clarify whether they do qualify to be appointed or not. But I need to emphasize the fact that this is done prior to marking, and towards the end when the markers are going to be marking, the provinces deal with the issues that we have highlighted during our audit, which happened prior to marking. Another item, few items on appointment of markers. The one that was also partially complied with, it's a recurrent of non-compliance was observed where some PEDs still fail to avail applicants' transcripts that I've already mentioned. It's a directive that in order to make it possible for us to audit properly, we need all the information that speaks to the people that are on the list that are potential appointees for marking. Another item that was partially complied with, which is a new directive that we have noted this year. We want the DBE to ensure that the PEDs submit the necessary data and provide access to online administration system for audit purposes. Then we go to the state of readiness. This is a process that we conduct prior to the conduct of the examinations. Around October, we give the PEDs and the DBE outcome of what we found during the conduct of the audit of the state of readiness, and they prepare themselves for the final year, and they also make sure that the items that we have highlighted, they address. And this slide gives the list of the meetings that we attended. You will appreciate that this year it was not easy for us to do a face-to-face audit. We then relied and attended the online meetings that the DBE held, where then the PEDs presented their cases. And since they also have presented to us their self-evaluation, we compared the notes at those meetings and made the final observations and decisions on how ready each PED was to conduct the oncoming examinations. We noted a few areas of improvement for the state of readiness. There was mitigating strategies employed by the PEDs to address the anticipated shortcomings with special reference to COVID-19 pandemic. Improvement of security features at the storage points. Example, the double locking system was strengthened where it was lacking. The PEDs taking cognizance of issues related to the accreditation of private centers and measures put in place to manage the unaccredited centers. The areas of improvement noted in 2019 state of readiness were strengthened, and the directives issued during the 2019 state of readiness were now complied with, and we were satisfied with that. However, we still had directives, but as you can see, the first three, these are the directives we issued in the previous years. they complied with them fully. All these ones were also complied with fully. But the third one, staff shortages at various levels of the system, is addressed as a matter of agency. That's a directive that we have issued in 2019, but we still found that there are certain provinces where staff shortages were not addressed. Hence, we say they have not complied with it, and we will still continue monitoring this directive to see that it is complied with, so that the conduct of and administration and management of the examinations goes according to plan. Furthermore, the other two first ones here, which were issued in 2019, we're glad to note that in 2020 they were complied with. But then the last two, they were issued in 2019 as not compliant. For 2020, a little improvement was done. It's partially compliant, but we will then continue monitoring them in 2021. That is high vacancy rate of exam-related staff and marker shortage in subjects which are likely to attract high enrollment. We further did monitoring of the writing of examinations, and this slide gives the stats of how many centers did we monitor in which province. You can see the total number is 466, but it was spread as it's on the slide. Areas of improvement in the monitoring of the writing. We noted a few. Effective implementation of the DBE published health and safety protocol for conduct of examinations was adhered to by examination centers across districts in the 9 PDs. And there was a notable monitoring visit during the writing of life orientation by the district officials for the sample centers. This one, we were concerned about it in 2019, and maybe if the members may know, life orientation, it's written earlier before the final exam is written, and it's conducted at the schools. Then in 2019, as Umalusi, when we did our monitoring, we noted that it was somewhat left in the hands of the schools. The monitoring was very limited from the districts, from the province, but in 2020, we saw a huge improvement in that. The DBE and PEDs maintained the 2019 areas of improvement that I've already alluded to, that the directives we issued in 2019, most of them they were fully complied with, some were partially complied with, but we will continue monitoring those that were not fully addressed. Here are the directives for monitoring for the 2020 examinations. First one, we want the DBE to ensure that the examination centers verify the candidates at the entry point for relevant documentation to avoid impersonation. There were a few pockets of irregularities in this regard, hence we say it was partially complied with. But the next one was fully complied with, and all these other three on this slide, which the members at their own time can look at those, they were also fully complied with. We have a few ones that were also partially complied with. The PED must conduct pre-writing audits of all exam centers and provide feedback reports to the examination centers. We noted that in some districts, the district undertook audits. However, the reports of the audits were not available at the centers monitored by Umalusi. Again, we noted that there was a notable monitoring visits during the writing of life orientation that I've already mentioned. And another directive that was issued in 2019 and partially complied with in 2020, majority of centers still experience challenges during power outages. Whereas we know that it's a norm in this country, we normally have our load shedding here and there, but when subjects that really rely on electricity are written, we expect that those centers must have backup systems so that the candidates must not be affected. But we noted that few of the centers this year did not have the backup systems during the writing of those subjects. Again, a directive that was partially complied with, and which is a new directive for 2021, systems must be in place for monitoring and evaluating of invigilator performance. This we put down because The irregularities that we have experienced, basically we note that it is due to the fact that some invigilators are negligent. And if the department and the PEDs can make it a point that there is a monitoring of the invigilators so that there is a consequence management, probably we will reduce the number of irregularities, especially the ones that are due to negligence of the invigilators. We're going to look at monitoring of marking. We monitor marking also when marking is conducted. We have noted a few areas of improvement. The role of the DBE played in ensuring that acceptable levels of readiness in preparing for the quality assurance of marking processes across PEDs was commendable. All PEDs managed marking processes that were free from disruptions. All PEDs ensured that there were implementable strategies in place to mitigate any possible risks relating to marking. Of note were the strategies each PED developed to mitigate possible marker shortages, which Umalusi verified during the monitoring at sampled marking centers. And remarkable levels of compliance with the DBE health and safety protocols for managing marking centers under COVID-19 conditions were evidenced across monitored marking centers. The DBE had successfully addressed the following directives for compliance and improvement issued in 2019. The directives on this slide two, the last two, they were fully complied with after having been issued in 2018. In 2019, it was compliant. That is the training material. And then in 2020, it was fully compliant with. But the first one, where we asked the DBE to ensure that the security at the main entrances into the marking centers is tight, and security guards must be trained by the assessment body in order for them to be effective and efficient. That one, we found that it was partially complied with, and we expect that the DBE must put measures in place to make that there is full security at all marking centers. The other few here which were partially complied with, there was evidence, or rather evidence suggests that there were still marking centers with limited electricity backup in case of power outage. We issued a directive in that regard, and we've got this new 3 directives for 2020. All centers must be audited before they can be allocated marking center status. We found that there were a few centers that were really not conducive to be marking centers, and the issues are stated in the report. What are the issues that we're concerned with? Each PED should provide center managers with audited lists of appointed markers for verification purposes, and uniform security arrangements must be in place so that there is uniform security measures in all the marking centers. Marking guideline discussions prior to the marking of the question papers. We do attend the marking guideline discussion meetings conducted by the DBE, as Umalusi moderators have to sign off all those marking guidelines that will be used at the marking center. And we attended 133 of those meetings. And the following areas of improvements were noted. The DBE was able to mitigate the COVID-19 challenges with virtual meetings to augment face-to-face meetings. And there was a significant increase in the level of compliance with the 20 scripts pre-marking requirement in 2020 as compared to 2019. However, there were just a few issues that we noted that needed the DBE's attention. Firstly, we want the DBE to ensure that chief markers and internal moderators are provided with the required 20 scripts. However, I've just mentioned that there was a significant improvement. It's not all of them that managed to get the 20 scripts, but we require that they do, because this is one of the policy matters, or rather it is in the DBE's policy that they need to get the 20 scripts. Sufficient time should be allowed between the writing of question papers and its marking guideline discussion meetings. And this allows time for chief markers and internal moderators to mark the sample number of scripts. This was not consistent in all the other, rather in all the subjects where we attended the marking guideline discussions, and we require that it must be taken into consideration in planning for the marking guideline discussions next year. On this slide, all the three directives issued were complied with. You can see some of them were issued prior to 2018. As you can see, the first one, it was complied with in the past 3 years, of which now I think the DBE is now very able to deal with this matter, which will not be a directive again. The next one was issued in 2018, complied with in 19 as well as in 2020, and that shows that there is some sustainability in the matter that was directed, and improvement it's seen throughout the 2 years, as well as the third one here, it was complied with for 2019 and 2020. The issues related to this are on this slide, and I think honorable members will go through those. Due to constraint of time, I'm not going to look at them. The first two here, they're also complied with. And the last one, which I need to speak to, the PED access to training scripts. As I've indicated, the training script, the 20 scripts are not fully utilized in all the subjects. So the PEDs need to address that matter. We look at the verification of marking, areas of improvement which we observed during the verification of marking. The seating arrangements adhered to social distancing protocol, and this made it easy for marking personnel to maintain a high level of concentration during the marking process. There was less evidence of shadow marking reported for the marking centers. In the Western Cape, daily constructive feedback sessions were implemented for Afrikaans home language by the internal moderator and chief marker to ensure consistent and focused marking procedures. The marking process for SASL paper 1, paper 2, and paper 3 was executed with much smoother than in previous years. Two aspects that contributed to this were that only grade 12 SASL home language teachers marked the literature, and deaf teaching assistants assisted with the dialect variations during the marking process. Furthermore, we have areas of improvement observed. The quality of internal moderation of physical sciences, paper 2 has improved in KwaZulu-Natal. The marking of the creative answers for music, paper 1, indicated a marker improvement from previous years. This is attributed to the appointment of more experienced marking personnel and excellence on-site training. The placement of the examination assistant in the marking venue with mechanical technology, automotive fitting, welding was a definite improvement regarding the addition of marks on the scripts. In addition, the marking personnel is more experienced, which affected the marking process positively. Marking errors identified for mathematical literacy, paper 1 and paper 2 in the Western Cape, were communicated to the markers to avoid recurrence of similar errors. This type of moderation was both informative and developmental to all marking personnel. Now, here we see a list of the directives, again, looking at the 3 years. The first one was complied with from 2019 as well as in 2020. That is appreciated, and that's what I've spoken to about the KZN marking. Next one, marking in each subject is synchronized across the PEDs, and a more effective way needs to be found to guarantee that any approved changes to the final Umalusi approved marking guideline arrive timelessly in the PEDs. This was partially complied because we realized that, for instance, if you can see that the dummy scripts in some PEDs, such as the Northern Cape, Free State, and the Western Cape, were not submitted on time, they were delayed. Then the next one, appointed markers confirmed their attendance for marking prior to the commencement of the marking process. That was also partially complied with. PEDs managed to replace the markers which withdrew or declined appointments using the reserve mark list. But if those mark lists are not available, it's not easy for us as Umalusi to verify the replacements. Furthermore, for verification of marking, the first one was complied with. The next one, This was not complied with, and it's a concern because you can see it recurs from 2019. The matter here is markers who specialize in one area were still made to mark the scripts of the other area of specialization. That happened in mechanical technology. So the DBE needs to ensure that markers for mechanical technology who specialize in each of the 3 specializations are appointed to mark the subject. We have another one which was not complied with in 2019, but now it is partially complied with, and that relates to
specialization. Specialization is still recently.
DG, mute your phone. You may continue.
Okay, that one relates to the SASL home language teachers. They mark the literature and deaf teaching assistant assisted with the dialect variation during the marking. In this one, we require that the DBE must ensure that markers of South African Sign Language home language are current grade 12 teachers in the subject. Furthermore, for verification of marking, we issued new directives where we found the DBE not compliant, and those ones we require that the DBE must ensure that there is sufficient pool of markers to draw from in case of withdrawal of strategies due to unforeseen circumstances. We again require the DBE to issue appointment letter, or rather make sure that appointment letters are issued and distributed to all marking personnel prior to the commencement of marking. Furthermore, we want the DBE to ensure that additional personnel is appointed for administration duties and the welfare of markers. This will release the chief markers and internal moderators from these duties to concentrate and add value to the marking moderation process. Another 3 that we issued, the DBE needs to ensure that marking personnel with requisite subject content knowledge and teaching experience at grade 12 level are appointed. That is in English first additional language. Such markers must be conversant with the different genres applicable to paper 2. Again, whole script moderation of 10% of all script is completed by deputy chief markers and internal moderators rather. And the last one we put in place in case we continue with COVID until the end of this year, COVID-19 protocols are adhered to at all marking centers. This we put in place, though we have seen that the marking centers did comply, but there was just few pockets of concern where we want the DBE to make sure that this is addressed in case we still have COVID-19. And the standardization and resulting, I will allow the CEO to speak to this, the standardization of the results of 2020. Thank you.
Chairperson, we're going to conclude very soon with a few slides, but before I go to those slides, I wish to tender Professor Volming's apology. He has to leave this meeting at 12:30, 12:30, for another long-standing engagement. With your kind permission, Chair, if you could give your consent, we'll be very grateful. I hope the chairperson...
Prof will be released. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to be talking to a few slides and then we'll conclude. The first point that I want to talk to is standardization, which is part of our mandate, as I read it out of our founding acts. So I'll be talking to standardization and resulting. The question is, what is standardization? Standardization is a process used to eliminate the effect of factors other than the learner's knowledge and abilities, aptitude on their performance. That is what standardization is about. Why do we standardize the results? We standardize results to ensure that learners, can you move the slides, Marie-Louise, as I proceed, so that don't leave the members behind? To ensure that learners are not advantaged or disadvantaged by factors other than their knowledge of the subject, abilities, and aptitude. To achieve comparability and consistency of the results from one year to the next. That's what standardization is. Standardization has got its own principles which have been approved by council. One of the first principles is that no adjustment should exceed 10% of the historical average in either direction, upwards or downwards. If the distribution of the raw marks is below above the historical average, the marks may be adjusted in either way, subject to limitations. That is low, downward adjustment or upward adjustment. In the case of an individual candidate, the adjustment effected should not exceed half of the raw mark obtained by the candidate. And standardization is done after.
May you hold on a bit, Doc? I'm having a problem with the screen here. If they could make it in such a way that we can see you talk, but still be able to read the slides, because your picture is in the middle of the slide. Or if it's not working, then maybe switch the video off so that we can be able to see the slides. Yes. Thank you.
Can I proceed, Chair? Can I proceed?
But from where I'm sitting, I see the slides and the small video on the right corner. But now, because the video is off, I think Dr. Rakometsu can proceed.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. Now, we consider qualitative and quantitative reports, and thereafter we formulate a position on each subject. That is very important. What is critical to note is that we don't only standardize the results of the Department of Basic Education, but we do for all other departments, the Department of Higher Education and Training, for those qualifications that are listed, National Certificate Vocational, GTC, N2 to N3, Basic Education, National Certificate, and Amended Senior Certificate. For the Independent Examinations Board, we indicate the qualifications that we standardize. Sakai, same way. Benchmark Assessment Agency, same way. So that means we don't only standardize the DBE. Now, this slide shows the number of offerings that we've standardized from 2016 to 2020, 58, 67, 65, as we go along the years. And what was taken as raw marks after standardization over the years, what was adjusted upwards, mainly upwards, what was adjusted mainly downwards. We always say our first bet is to retain the raw marks. And in 2020, we retained raw marks in 48 subjects. That constitutes 74% of the subjects that were submitted to us. 9 subjects, mainly upwards, and that constitutes 14%, mainly downwards, 8 subjects, that constitutes 12% of the total. Now, we observed a few challenges in these examinations. Some of them, the other people who spoke earlier have alluded to them. I'm going to repeat them just quickly. The leakage of the question papers of mathematics and physical sciences, very important. And I need to indicate that business studies and life sciences were only withdrawn by the department as a precautionary measures to ensure that maybe if there is any likelihood of them having been leaked, they should be replaced even before they are written. Administration of incorrect question papers in Limpopo in the Northwest is specified there. Writing of the wrong paper at a different level. And then group copying in the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, KwaZulu-Natal, and Mpumalanga. And then we observe that with South African Sign Language, the following need attention: the need for codification and standardization of the languages in the language in South Africa, because we've got various dialects, and these pose a lot of challenges for interpretation. And the teachers offering the subject should be appropriately qualified in the field. Earlier exposure of learners to the subject in schooling is very important. We make the following recommendations to the DBE: that they must tighten the security around the question papers at the point of printing, distribution, storage, and the writing of the papers, training of teachers in the development of good quality assessment tasks and marking guidelines, and training of teachers in marking, interpretation of learner responses. For an example, set common tasks, and so forth and so on. Ensure that the effective remediation and feedback for teachers and the learners is offered, so that we give them feedback on the work that they've done to say, how did they fare? Use of assessment and examination data to improve teaching and learning, intensifying training of invigilators and strengthening monitoring of writing is very important to ensure extra or increased vigilance during the conduct, administration, and management of examinations. The Executive Committee of Council issued a statement approving the results. I'm not going to read the statement, I'm just going to give you the highlights of the statement. That EXCO studied the reports from the department, and it noted isolated irregularities reported during the writing of the exam. This includes group copying reported in 4 provinces involving 893 candidates. Concerns about maths and science paper were noted in the approval statement of Council. That Council is satisfied that there were no systemic irregularities reported that might have compromised the overall credibility and integrity of the examination. Therefore, the examinations, the results were approved. We also note that in respect of areas where there were irregularities, the results were blocked for those candidates that are implicated, and that we still talk about the tightening of the security at all levels. And that with the leakage of mathematics and physical science papers, where there's been unauthorized access to the question papers, and where there is evidence beyond being a passive recipient, the results of the implicated candidates should be blocked pending further investigation. In all other areas, the results of the candidates should be released. That Umalusi should be sending directives to the department for compliance, and that those directives should be pursued and followed up, and necessary remedial measures must be implemented. And an improvement plan in this regard should be submitted to Umalusi by the 26th of March, 2021. And finally, that the department is commended for conducting a successful and credible examination despite the challenges presented by COVID-19 and the leakage of question papers through social media. On this note, Chairperson, I want to thank the department for running a good examination, thank the Portfolio Committee and the Select Committee for their support, thank the Minister and the Deputy Minister for their support to the work of Umalusi. And I want to pause, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Let me thank the Professor Bolming, and the Council for Quality Assurance in general, and further education and training for a job well done. Without taking much more time, honorable members, I'll give over to the members a chance to engage with these 2 good presentations, and ensuring that we give members enough time to engage. This last hour will be given to members. I have already asked questions earlier in my opening remarks, and when there was a transition from the department to Umalusi's presentation, I did ask some few questions, and of course, with the connection challenges that we all are faced with, I've lost more than 40 minutes of the presentations in the first part of the meeting, but I managed to catch up with everything. Over to you, honorable members, if you have some questions to ask and points of clarity let us engage. I'll monitor the engagement through the system. I can see with the raise hand thing, Honorable Gillion, followed by Honorable Slindile Tuli. Yeah, in that order. Honorable Gillion.
Chairperson, thank you very much. And let me take the opportunity to thank the department, Umalusi, Deputy Minister and Minister for a job well done in 2020. Chairperson, allow me first of all to congratulate the class of 2020, the teachers, the parents, SGB, and also convey my condolences to those families who lost their loved ones during this 2020 school year. Chairperson, as we are representatives from different provinces in the NCOP, my concentration will be on the province where I come from, which is the Western Cape. Now, listening to the presentations, I've got a few concerns and questions. During COVID, Chair, and I think the department, the Deputy Minister was part of our meetings throughout COVID, and the DG will remember that, and I think all of us experienced this throughout the country, is that during COVID, the one thing that was highlighted within this department is the inequalities. And if I listen very carefully, like I did this morning, I've got a big concern, DM, for what's happening in the Western Cape. Slide 42, I think, is one of the issues that is of concern when 13.9% reduce in maths in the Western Cape. Now, DM and DG, what is really concerning? That is the difference between your fee school and your no-fee school. And sitting in a situation where there's a gap of nearly 14% between the rich and the poor when it comes to maths in this province, need urgent intervention. I'm going to give you examples, Chairperson. In certain schools in our province, we don't even have maths teachers. And that is in the no-fee school, where children are forced to take other subjects because of the non-availability of maths teachers. Now, if we look into the Bill of Rights, how can we still, in this democracy, sit with a problem like that? In the Western Cape, a few years back, Chairperson, we were rated #1 in the matric results. And we have gone down. And the concern for me is, are we doing enough, especially when it comes to the poor schools, our poor children on the ground? DM, concerning today still in this Western Cape, we've got non-placement of learners with the amount of 5,000. I think, DM, when, and this got nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with politics. But if we look into the Bill of Rights, every child has the right to education. If a MEC tells parents that there's nothing she can do, I mean, we need intervention. We need intervention because our children, our kids are struggling under that. I don't know what we can do because I know the parents are following what they're supposed to follow. They register their children, try to get them into schools, and this has an impact on what to expect from your children and from your community. Now, if we look into we can brag about the Western Cape getting very, very good results, bachelors, all of that. But there is something happening on a level when you go into the middle of your basic education. And I think we must really do a proper oversight over our provinces. Other members can talk about their provinces. I'm concentrating on the Western Cape. When it comes to Umalusi, I want to congratulate you. I want to congratulate the leadership of Umalusi, of how you handle all the situations during this COVID period. But I am very, very concerned that DM, that our results when it comes to maths and science, we got a pass rate, but the interest of our learners are there, but we as the department are failing them. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Gillian. Honorable Luthulu Slindile. Sikulindile.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Ngibingelela wonke umuntu okhona, and ngibingelele no DM, ne-department. Ngiphinde ngidlulise namazwi okududuza kulabo abalahlekelwe iy'mpilo zabo ngesikhathi se-COVID, ikakhulukazi abothisha nabafundi. Nginembuzo nje mhlawumbe emibili noma emithathu, Hlalo. Ngithanda ukwazi ukuthi i-department iyiphi support eyinikeza iy'fundazwe lezi ene-higher enrollment, ikakhulukazi i-Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal kanye neLimpopo. Ngicela futhi nokwazi ukuthi ikuphi abakwenzayo ukusiza lezi iy'kole lezi esey'qalile ama-study camps, ngoba ikole ebekade ngiyivakashela ngonyaka odlule namanje manje unyaka uqalile, sitholile ukuthi bayawancoma lama-study camps abanawo, kodwa i-challenge abanayo wonke lama-camps adinga uxhaso lwey'mali, especially abafundi ukuthi badle ukuze bakwazi ukuthi bafunde. So umnyango ikuphi akwenzayo. Nanokuthi-ke omunye umbuzo ukuthi iziphi iy'nhlelo abanazo ukumonitha or ukusupervise labo thisha laba abangenzi kahle, othola ukuthi unyaka uma uphela iy'funda bebey'fundisa akuphasiwe kahle kuzona. And also mhlampe okugcina-ke nje umbuzo, we have ama-subjects abalulekile anjengo-mathematics nabo-science, not saying ukuthi la amanye akabalulekile. Iyiphi into eyenzayo umnyango ukuqinisekisa ukuthi othisha esinabo lapha ey'koleni abafundisa lezi y'fundo, othisha okuyibona bona, nanokuthi asikho isikole esinalezi y'fundo kodwa ingenabo othisha. Uthola ukuthi khona abanye abantwana abebekhala ngonyaka odlule ukuthi bebengenabo othisha be-mathematics nabothisha be-science unyaka wonke, baze babathola mhlawumbe unyaka usuphela. Yona kuphi ozokwenza kulo nyaka umnyango ukuqinisekisa ukuthi sonke isikole sinabo bonke othisha abadingakalayo. Ngiyabonga kakhulu.
Yeah, thanks, Honorable Thuli. Those are the only two questions that were asked.
Chairperson.
Those are the only two hands I see. Honorable Baha.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just don't have the raise hand thing. I don't know what happened to it.
No, you're welcome.
Chair, yes, thank you, Chair. I want to welcome the report, even though the presentations were tried to meet the time limits in terms of length. But I just want to check, Chairperson, because for me, I think there's one key question that we need to answer, and that is we are not out of the woods in terms of COVID-19. And probably if we don't do anything, we might find ourselves in the same situation like we were towards the end and the beginning of this year in terms of COVID-19. I just want to check, Chairperson, from the department as to what it is that have been considered to kind of get rid of all the situations that we found ourselves in. Is there something that is being done which would kind of, one, assist our learners in getting better results than we've done, but also to make sure that they are safe in terms of COVID-19, and also the loss of life that we've had? Is there something that is being done to make sure that we are not in the similar situation that we were in? But I think that, Chairperson, having said all of that, I want to also say that I think learners did very well under the circumstances. It was not an easy year, and we're hopeful that it might not go into that this coming year, but at least it has to do with the kind of preparations that we get into. That's just basically the only question that I have. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Honorable Baha. Is there another member who want to raise a point of clarity or a comment on what was said? A lot of questions were asked. Let's give the
Sorry, Chair, you are on mute.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to check with the Umalusi about the security companies that get employed by the department during this period of examinations. Do they go through a vetting process, or is there a way in which you capacitate them to understand the sensitivity of the matters you're dealing with? And what interventions in terms of capacity building for those security companies do you have? And there were issues again raised earlier, that I think will be attended to. And if the answers are not as members will want them to be, they can rephrase the questions later and then we engage. And in instances where there is not enough time to answer the questions, the general approach usually is that then the department would have to respond to those questions in writing. Thank you very much. May I give over to the DG and the team to respond to some of the questions asked by the members. Thank you. Over to you, DG, DM.
DG, can you start with Umalusi following, please? I look at the time is against the members.
Thank you very much, DM and the Honorable Chair. and honorable members. I'm in an area in KZN in King Cetshwayo, in the village where connectivity is a challenge. I hope you can hear me. I've just managed to hear questions which were asked by Honorable Baha and Honorable Lutuli. So Honorable Gillian, I couldn't hear the questions that she was asking because of connectivity on my side. Just to say that starting with Honorable Lutuli and I think Honorable Baha, the resources that are provided for supporting learners in terms of learner support program. Every province has got a learner support program. At national, we call it National Learner Attainment Strategy, which is driven by the curriculum line function. Learners are supported from national. We support them, for instance, with study guides and so on, and other materials that are needed. But at provincial level, that's where resources such as accommodation and catering are provided for every class of every year. We go out, officials from curriculum, myself, we go out to provinces to check whether these programs are in place and whether learners are supported or not. But I must be honest to say that the budget cuts that happen virtually every year are actually beginning to cut into this support that is intended to be provided, especially to learners who come from disadvantaged communities. So that's what provinces are doing. So far, all of them, except for a few, I mean, you can see the province that invests in learner support more than any other province is Gauteng, because of the financial resources that they have. Free State, for instance, it's more of creativity. They don't have enough resources, but they do support. But all provinces do provide some support to learners. But I just wanted to single out that KZN has come on board. That's why you have seen for the past 3 to 5 years, KZN has just been on an upward trajectory. They've started to invest quite a lot in terms of supporting learners in camps and so on. Well, regarding, it is true that the second wave is coming, and the second wave, the third wave is coming, not the second, the third one. We've seen how brutal the second wave has been, and the third wave might probably be worse than the second wave, because we've seen that the second wave was actually worse than the first wave. So schools have started,
or better than the second wave.
in the positive. If we follow what the president advises all the time, we're likely not to have a third wave, DM, if we speak in the positive. But if things are going to go as they happened during the festive season, the third wave is going to be worse than the second wave. So what has happened is that schools have started already with Saturday programs, and have also prepared for autumn support camps that are also starting as soon as we go into the autumn recess. So provinces have prepared for that. We've met with them, and they have indeed prepared. So in short, that's what I can say. It's extra effort from teachers, extra effort from officials to support teachers, which we have seen from national up to school level. But also, the Honorable Chair said, what makes other schools to perform better than others and so on? They say fish rots from the head. It begins with the leadership at school level. Deputy Minister can tell you that, having been a principal before. The performance of every organization begins with the leadership of that organization. If you get the leadership right, you get the support of the parents right, and you get teachers committed and hardworking, you've got the ingredients that are really more than adequate to get the school to perform. All in all, it's about hard work all the way. And my view is that, as Dr. Polia correctly observed, we are a system on the rise. You can see that the system has been rising despite the fact that we've had a drop in the overall pass rate. You can see the majority of the areas that the class of 2020 was the best class ever and probably the strongest class, not only resilient, but being able to perform better than even previous classes. If we continue, and the message, we are meeting with provinces. Yesterday, we met with KZN, tomorrow it's Limpopo. It's one-on-one meetings, we do them virtually. We used to go there to do them face-to-face. We reflect on the performance and say to them, these are the areas that we need to focus on. We are doing that already. We, at the Lekota, Umalusi was there, presented the same thing that they presented here. I'm sorry, Marie-Louise, I was gossiping in the sideline. It looked like I had not muted myself. But all that we are seeing, as Dr. Polia also said, all these areas that are identified by Umalusi as well, we attend to them. And I think the one about security companies, Dr. Polia can comment on that, but security companies are procured by provinces. And we really don't get involved in that. We are thinking about the situation after we establish the examination council. There might be a need to centralize the administration of the exams, which is just a thought at the moment, which will present to the Council of Education Ministers. Thank you very much, DM. I hope I've responded to questions that were raised by Honorable Bacha and Honorable Lutul. Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
The question by Honorable Gillian about the drop in the results in the Western Cape. That was it. But I think maybe one of... How many chairs do we have in this meeting? Okay. Yeah, you're still answering questions. Over to you.
Well, if the question is about dropout rate, Chair, the official dropout rate is between 12 and 15%, which was picked up by the National Dynamic Study. That's the only research that has been able to give us empirical evidence. But the fact that 1.2 learners enter the system and only half of that go through the system, it's by no means a reflection of any dropout. The example that I like to give is that if 400 people get admitted in the hospital and only 200 of them get released, discharged as being cleared of influenza, does it mean the other 400 are all dead? It's unlikely. It might be that others are at different levels of recuperation. So the problem that we have in the system is the failure and the repetition rate, not the dropout rate. The dropout rate is there. We are not overlooking it. And that's why we can tell you that at some point we picked up in grade 1, we had a repetition rate of 30%, which is something that should not be allowed. In other countries, that would not be allowed. And that's why the Council of Education Ministers took a decision that in the foundation phase, learners should not be retained. So our major problem is not dropout rate, it's failure and repetition rate. Thank you, Chair.
Chairperson.
Yeah, Honorable Gillian.
Chairperson,
I wanted to come.
The Deputy DM can give clarity because I think the DM listened to, she was on the platform when I spoke.
Yeah, yes, Chair. I wanted to come last, but I understood Honorable Gillian's concern in the Western Cape in particular, but it does not only affect us in Western Cape, it's Western Cape and Gauteng. Yes, one reason we understand that people are moving. There is a lady who was living in Gauteng and has just moved to the Western Cape due to work. And up until now, the child is still struggling to get accommodation. So we are engaging the Department of Education in the Western Cape because the number of learners in in February who had not yet been placed, which I think DG listens to me now, who had not been placed, the number was huge in the Western Cape. And there's a tendency, but not only Western Cape, in all our big cities and big towns, that when there's a waiting list, the waiting list might sometimes affect only African learners. You ask yourself, the African learner is residing almost closer to the school, but that learner is on the waiting list. And when you check with the parent has applied right on time, just like all the other parents, and then they get placed. So, and the African learners are put now on the waiting list. And until we intervene, it's only then that they will be placed. It's a challenge. Yes, I understand Honorable Gillion says that should not be a political matter, because an education of our children should not be politicized whatsoever. But when we look at, even in the presentation that was done by Dr. Polia, you can see that the support of progress learners in the Western Cape is almost equal to 0. And when we look at the support of progress learners in the Free State, it's close to 100%. Then it tells that we only focus in the Western Cape, we focus only on the previously haves. And the previously disadvantaged must remain as such in the Western Cape. But we are engaging the department to support all schools equally and to make sure that all learners are absorbed. Because if all these learners are in the Western Cape, where do we expect them to go to? That's what we're engaging the department on, because really, when you look at the basic rights, education is one of the basic rights of our children in South Africa. That's why we say the doors of education shall be open to all, which has been also is enshrined in the Constitution. But we experience a problem when they say, no, it's full. And the child is just living next to the school, but they say, no, there's nothing that we can do. The school is full. Then what? So it's a responsibility of the departments, basic education and provincial departments, to make sure that all the learners are absorbed. We are engaging, like DG says, they're having a one-on-one with provinces. That is also in the agenda, the absorption of all learners residing in that province. So we experience that mostly in Gauteng and Western Cape, but it's worse in the Western Cape. Yes, we understand that these are our big cities, are our economic hubs. These two provinces draws all people from rural provinces to go to those provinces. That's why we need to add more capacity in terms of provision of education in those two provinces. Can we allow Umalusi now then to come in and respond, Chair?
DM, Honorable Chairperson, Umalusi did not have any specific questions directed at us, except the question on the security companies, which the DG has responded to. But now that I'm on the platform, I just want to emphasize one point, that the class of 2020 did very well, exceptionally well. All odds were against this class. So heads off for the class of 2020, their teachers, the parents, and everybody. And I want to emphasize the fact that grade 12 is a culmination of 12 years of schooling. And the results of 2020 reflect that there's been hard work with this cohort for the past 12 years. That the final year where we had a mishap, an earth-shattering mishap of COVID-19, did not throw the system off balance because of consistent hard work. For that, I want to commend the DBE. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's the response from the team, basic education, but we understand, and it's not for the first time that Honorable Gillion is raising these things on Western Cape. We are going to stay closer with that department. Though they close doors, they think they are a country. They are not a country, they are a province like all the other 8 provinces, and the basic education. That's why even the MEC there is called minister. Maybe they think it's equal to Minister Muteka. I don't know, but we are coming closer to working with that province to make them realize that they are not a country, they are a province that is operating within the unitary state of our country, South Africa. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, DM. Thank you.
Is there any other comment before we close? Because we have a sitting now at about 2 o'clock. In the absence of no hand, there's no raised hand. Yeah, then I'll say, let me take this opportunity to thank the members for the time and their engagement with the inputs, and also thank the DM. Thanks, DM, who've always been with us all the time. The ministry never disappointed us. And also each time we want to have engagement with Umalusi, we never found them wanting. They always responded on time, and each engagement of Umalusi and the department, it's empowerment. We get empowered. We learn something each time we engage with you. With those few words, I'll say thank you very much, and you'll be released, and then we'll take 5 minutes to deal with the internal business of the committee.
Thank you so much, Chair. We really appreciate the support we get from the Select Committee. Thank you.
You're welcome. Honorable members, let's move to the 2 minutes of the can you flag the minutes? Ms. Kaka, may you fly the minutes so that we...
All right, Chair.
All right. We've got two sets of joint meetings. One of the
Can you see the minutes, Chair?
the joint meetings, yeah. Will you open the first one?
Can you see the minutes, Chair?
No, I don't. That's why I'm quiet. I only see that, oh yeah, there's minutes of the 13th. Is it the 13th?
It's the 10th.
Yeah, no, I see only 2 lines. Joint PC on education. Those are 2 joint meetings. Those are the only meetings we have. That those minutes are not. but I don't see the minutes on the screen. May you open the minutes, the first one there?
The minutes are on the screen, Chair.
I only see, okay. Let's look at page 1 of the first minute. We got this minute quite some days ago. Any comment from the joint PC on education and the standing committee? Any comment? No comment. Any mover for adoption of the minutes of the?
Chairperson, Honorable Malika, I move for the adoption of the minutes as the true reflection.
Honorable Malika has moved for the adoption. Any seconder?
Ndongeni.
Ndonge, any second? Is there any objection to that? No objection, then the minutes are agreed to. Let's move to the second page. Can't get to open this.
The second set of minutes is open, Chair.
Page 1. And page 2 of the minute. We got this minutes more than a week ago. Can somebody move for adoption?
Member Gillian, Chair.
Honorable Gillian, any seconder? Any seconder to?
Ndongeni.
Don't get any seconds. Is there any objection to this minutes being adopted? There's no objection, it's agreed to. So therefore, honorable members, this to the end of
Your connection is very bad, Chair.
Thank all of you for having availed yourself under these difficult times to be in this meeting. Thank you very much, and this meeting is adjourned. Tando.
Hello, Chair. Your connectivity is very bad, Chair. My apologies, honorable members. I'm not sure whether it's connectivity on my side or it was on Chair's side, but I couldn't hear the last part of the meeting, especially where Chair was giving the closing remarks. Now I'm not sure whether it's my connection or
Tando, maybe it was the chair because we can hear you now.
Oh. Oh, all right. I thought it was mine. Did you hear the last part of Chair's remarks? Honorable Malaka.
No, I don't know what's going on. I didn't hear anything after we adopted the minutes.
But I think he was closing the meeting. But the connection was very bad.
Honorable Gillian, did you hear the chair?
Can I try to call her? Sorry, can I try to call him?
I tried. He's not picking up.
Okay.
I think the chair has closed them. He was trying to do his closing remarks to close the meeting. Is there no more minutes left?
No, no more minutes left.
Okay, I think the members, let's close the meeting. I know the chair got connectivity problems. If you allow me, let me then use this opportunity to thank everybody for your participation, and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, my chief whip.
Yeah.
You will be our chief whip in the meeting now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mrs. Bosch.
Talk to me. Yes, I'm listening.
Oh, okay.
I'm good. I'm good.
Hi, account.
Good.
I'm good.
Report sorted.
That is very bad. This side.
Yeah, networking, man, not good. But you are fine, eh? Submissions and all.
I'm fine.
Okay, good. Okay. I'll hold you offline, Giver.
All right.
Did you check the chat box? Anything on the chat box? Did you take any comments on the chat box?
No, nothing.
All right.
It's nothing.
Okay. Sharp Ketandus, thanks.
All right then. I'm ending the.
Bye.
Bye.